In the grand collapse of any civilization, there is always a single moment frozen in time as the point of no return. For 10th century China, that moment did not unfold within the whispered conspiracies of a lavish palace, but upon the frozen surface of a mighty river. This is the Hutuo River, a natural shackle across the North China Plain. The truth we seek, the truth behind the annihilation of an entire era, lies entombed beneath the stones of a crossing known as the Zhongdu Bridge. On the 27th of December 2025, the Chinese servers of Where Winds Meet officially launched a massive new expansion, the Hutuo River. To the casual player, this may seem like a standard content update, offering new territories to explore and enemies to conquer. But for those who search for logic within the shards of broken history, this is a visual restoration 1,000 years in the making. Why should we care so much about a single stone bridge? Because in the year 946 AD, this bridge was the jugular vein of Central Chinese civilization. The year was 946 AD, the third year of the Kaiyun era of the later Jin dynasty. In the long river of Chinese history, the title Kaiyun, meaning the opening of fortune, stands as a peak of historical irony. History has a dark sense of humor. Rulers often light their most deceptive beacons on the very eve of plunging into the abyss. By then, the later Jin regime was teetering on the brink of extinction, eroded by years of internal strife, boundless corruption, and a volatile foreign policy that had finally run out of room to maneuver. If you were to look down upon this land from a god's eye view, you would feel a suffocating military tension. On this geopolitical chessboard, to the north stood the Khitan Lao Empire at its absolute zenith. Emperor Taizong Yelu Deguang, a steppe sovereign of immense military ambition and cold-blooded ruthlessness, was personally leading tens of thousands of heavy cavalry southward. This was the most formidable war machine in East Asia at the time, an armored torrent of its age. They were not merely marching, they were harvesting a decaying empire. On the southern bank of the Hutuo River, the later Jin Empire had staked its final and only remaining trump card, an elite force of 100,000 veteran soldiers commanded by General Zhongwei. These men were the last blood and flesh barrier protecting the heart of civilization. Behind them lay the defenseless plains leading to the capital, Beijing, and the lives of tens of millions of people. In that desolate winter, the two armies faced off across the water. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the chilling stench of rusted iron. Everyone expected an epic showdown that would decide the fate of a civilization, a struggle on the scale of Waterloo or Stalingrad. But in the shadows of history, a much darker game was quietly afoot. The Zhongdu Bridge, which should have been the unbreakable shield against the foreign iron hooves, was instead destined to become a massive sacrificial altar. The snows of that year muffled the gasps of the dying, while the river flowed restlessly beneath the ice, witnessing a commander reaching out his hands to personally strangle the very civilization he was sworn to protect. To attribute the fall of the Zhongdu Bridge merely to a tactical defeat would be a gross oversimplification of this dark chapter of history. The most harrowing aspect of history often lies not in the strength of the enemy, but in the internal disintegration of the fortress itself. The architect of this collapse was the man seated upon the later Jin high command, General Zhongwei. In the desolate December of 946 AD, Zhongwei was by no means a weak or indecisive mediocrity. On the contrary, he was a master speculator with an incredibly keen nose for political power. Standing upon the command platform on the southern bank of the Hutuo River, watching the Khitan iron cavalry surging like a black tide on the opposite shore, he was not calculating troop formations or the defense of the realm. According to historical records like the Ziji Tongjian, Zhongwei was executing a ruthlessly cold equation of capital realization. His goal was to take his 200,000 elite troops and, on the eve of the empire's collapse, sell them in bulk to his future master at the highest possible price. Du realized that the later Jin regime was a flickering candle in a storm. However, the 200,000 soldiers under his command were the final assets of Central Chinese civilization and his only bargaining chips to negotiate with the Khitan Emperor, Yelu Deguang. Thus, he made a despicable decision that would send shivers down the spines of future military strategists and earn him eternal infamy. He not only ordered the camp gates locked, strictly forbidding any counterattack against the Khitan forces while they were vulnerable mid-crossing, but he personally orchestrated a rare historical atrocity at the very front lines, a wholesale sacrificial surrender. Under the resentful and bewildered gaze of his own men, Du secretly dispatched envoys across the river to finalize a filthy political transaction to demonstrate total submission to Yelu Degwang. He forced these 200,000 battle-hardened veterans, the finest warriors of the Central Plains, to lay down their weapons and surrender en masse before the enemy's hooves. This was not a simple case of withholding support or non-resistance. It was a comprehensive spiritual execution. Imagine the scene. 200,000 fully armed soldiers, ready and able to fight, were forced by their own commander to watch as Khitan riders took over their defenses without shedding a single drop of blood. Their steel blades, yet to be stained in battle, were confiscated. Behind them, their wives, children, and elders instantly lost their only shield. Zhongwei did not just lock the camp gates, he locked away the backbone of a civilization. He traded the humiliation of 200,000 men for the titles of Grand Preceptor or Prince of Yan in the new dynasty. He personally dismantled the last line of defense and sent a groveling signal to his Khitan master. "I have personally snapped the spine of the Central Plains. Please, Your Majesty, come and take your seat." This extreme sense of suffocation is the precise narrative undertone that Where Winds Meet seeks to reconstruct. On that map, you see more than just ruins. You see the terrifying echo of a staggering collapse triggered by a commander's betrayal. When the protagonist steps onto this land once more, he faces not just an enemy, but a heavy destiny haunted by the souls of 200,000 betrayed men. When Zhongwei issued that shameful order for collective disarmament, a deathly silence fell over the entire Zhongdu Bridge camp. It was the sound of the backbone being ripped out of 200,000 men. Wang Qing, the Vanguard General, refused to obey. He understood that once these 200,000 men laid down their weapons, there would be no men left in the Central Plains, only lambs waiting for the slaughter. In that suffocating moment, Wang Qing personally led his few hundred elite guards and, without any hope of reinforcements, charged directly toward the stone bridge, shrouded in death. This was by no means a conventional military assault. It was a suicidal trial directed at the betrayer. In the authentic records of history, Wang Qing fought until his strength was spent and died in battle, his blood staining the ice of the Hutuo River. His death, in the grand sweep of history, could not prevent Zhongwei's surrender, but it nailed the final shred of civilization's dignity into that darkest of hours. In the narrative reconstruction of Where Winds Meet, this cold historical fact is granted a crucial, emotionally charged gap. Here, the game introduces a fictional character, Jiang Yan, Wang Qing's foster son. While Jiang Yan's name cannot be found in historical texts, in the game's wuxia narrative, he serves as a form of literary compensation for the cold, hard truth. In the split second when Wang Qing threw his body against the enemy lines to tear open the Khitan defense, Jiang Yan, the youth who inherited his foster father's spirit, protected a swaddled infant and, amidst the chaos and smoke of the battlefield, turned away and vanished into the thick, southern mist. The existence of Jiang Yan is essentially a solace offered by the game for that tragic betrayal. History is cruel. It records only the fall of Wang Qing and the surrender of 200,000. But the game is compassionate. It assumes that on that meat grinder of a battlefield, someone was still racing for the sake of future life. Jiang Yan took away not just an infant, but Wang Qing's unyielding martial soul and the last spark of conscience that had yet to be sold. This is why, in Where Winds Meet, the prologue is so desolate, yet contains a glimmer of light at its core. That surviving infant became the only variable in this betrayal of 200,000 men. When 16 years later, this spark soaked in blood returns, the long sword in his hand will no longer be just for survival. It will be to complete the unfinished reckoning for the general who died at the bridge. In December 946 AD, with the fall of the Zhongdu Bridge, the spine of the later Jin Empire snapped completely. But this was more than the end of a dynasty. It was a massive avalanche that swept the entire Central Plains into 16 years of the most turbulent and lawless darkness. To understand the cruelty of this history, one must look directly at the chain reaction following Zhongwei's surrender. In the long river of real history, the disarmament of these 200,000 elites meant that the Central Plains had physically lost its last barrier. The Khitan Emperor, Yelu Degwang, rode into the center of power, beyond Jing, almost entirely upon the humiliation of the Jin soldiers. From that moment, the banks of the Yellow River became a hunting ground for foreign iron hooves. Historical records of this period are filled with harrowing phrases like displaced persons by the tens of thousands and white bones covering the wilderness. This is the heaviest historical backdrop before the story of Where Winds Meet begins. The most fatal wound was that this betrayal led directly to the total fall of the 16 prefectures of Yanyun. Because Zhongwei sold out the empire's core war machine, Central Chinese civilization completely lost the defensive initiative against northern nomadic cavalry for the next 16 years and beyond. It was like a giant whose vertebrae had been removed, left to struggle hopelessly in the mire. In the game's setting, these 16 years are materialized as a suffocating social ecology. Through the lens, you see once prosperous villages turned to scorched earth and resilient customs distorted by war. In this civilizational fault line, Zhang Yan hides with the surviving infant in the northern lands known as the Scorched Earth. Imagine Zhang Yan's plight. He held not just the life of an infant, but the only truth of the Zhongdu Bridge massacre. In his exile, he witnessed traders like Zhongwei enjoying luxury under the protection of the Khitan, and he saw countless nameless soldiers like Wang Qing crushed by the wheels of history, leaving not even a name behind. These 16 years were a time of disordered power and the total loss of justice. In this fractured era, the law ceased to exist. There was only might and survival. Through this hardcore, desolate atmosphere, the game conveys a core logic to the player. When the commander betrays the soldiers and the regime betrays the land, every surviving civilian becomes a debtor to this history. The infant, under Jiang Yan's protection, grew into a young man amidst sword light and freezing snow. The sword in his hand, after 16 years of sharpening, is no longer for simple revenge. It is to strike at the dark law initiated by Zhongwei, the law of trading betrayal for momentary peace. History was snapped here for 16 years. Now, with the return of that spark, this fractured history will finally be reconnected. When his boots press against the crumbling, frozen stones of the Zhongdu Bridge, the historical aftershocks of a 16-year-old cataclysm finally reach their crescendo. The Zhongdu Bridge of this era is no longer the strategic stronghold that once held the fate of a nation. Instead, it is a geopolitical scar, a relic of civilization forgotten by time. The headless stone lions at the bridgehead and the rusted remnants of armor half buried in the silt are silent witnesses, endlessly recounting the tragedy of that winter in 946 AD. For the protagonist, this is more than a geographic coordinate. It is a sacred ground of origin and a tribunal for betrayal. Here, the enemies the player faces are no longer just bandits or fragmented warlords occupying the ruins. You are facing a dark logic known as fate. The logic initiated by Zhongwei that personal glory can be built upon the betrayal of one's comrades and country still slithers in the shadows of this land. The protagonist's return is, in essence, a violent deconstruction of that very logic. The sword in his hand carries the unyielding spirit of Wang Qing at the bridge, the weight of Zhang Yan's 16 years of exile, and the restless souls of the 200,000 soldiers sold as mere bargaining chips. In the game, this homecoming is imbued with immense narrative weight. As the player executes lethal techniques upon the Zhongdu Bridge, every strike of the blade feels like a reconnection of that single second snapped 16 years ago. History is cold. It rarely offers second chances to the weak, nor does it shift its course solely for the sacrifice of a hero. But Where Winds Meet offers a powerful historical variable. What happens when the survivor returns? How does he face a world that is still fractured, still rife with intrigue and betrayal? He does not return to revive the decayed later Jin dynasty, a regime that does not deserve saving. Nor does he return for simple blood vengeance, for hate alone cannot fill the Hutuo River. His return is to re-establish a sense of moral backbone, Fangu, amidst the ruins. He is there to tell the world that even in the darkest, most lawless eras, even when 200,000 men choose silence and surrender, there are still those willing to draw their blades against an invincible darkness for the sake of civilization's last shred of dignity. The Battle of Zhongdu Bridge is but a cold line of text in the official annals, but under the player's blade, it becomes a bloody, closed loop. Starting from that snowy night of flight in 946 AD, passing through 16 years of displacement on scorched earth, it finally reaches a reckoning 1,000 years in the making. This reckoning is not about changing the past, but about illuminating the future. As the protagonist stands at the bridgehead, looking toward the receding mist of the south, he is not just wielding Wang Qing's broken legacy, he is breathing life back into the final, gasping spirit of a civilization that almost flickered out in the snow. History is often a grand narrative written by the victors, yet the truth frequently lies curled within forgotten ruins, like those of the Zhongdu Bridge. As we traverse the desolate reaches of the Hutuo River today through the meticulously crafted lens of Where Winds Meet, China region, feeling the bone-chilling desolation of a northern winter, we must remind ourselves, what lies before us is far more than mere pixels on a screen or a scripted fiction. In a very real, very desperate winter over a millennium ago, a Vanguard General named Wang Qing truly fought until his last breath here. And 200,000 living, breathing soldiers were indeed sold like cattle by the commander they were meant to trust. History was violently snapped at the Zhongdu Bridge that year, leaving behind a civilizational vacuum that lasted 16 years and echoed far beyond. The true value of Where Winds Meet perhaps lies not in providing a thrilling martial arts playground, but in its almost obsessive pursuit of visual authenticity. It opens a window into that darkest of hours, showing us that even amidst a collective sinking of 200,000 souls, there were those who would fight for a spark, however faint that 1 second sliver of hope might have been. The sword, sharpened for 16 long years, is in fact held in each of our hands. When we tread upon the riverbanks cluttered with rusted armor in-game, or search for traces of justice across the map known as the Scorched Earth, we are engaged in a salvage operation across time and space. We are searching for the dignity brushed aside by the stroke of a historian's pen. We are seeking the spiritual integrity sacrificed at the altar of political intrigue. The snows of the Zhongdu Bridge may have ceased falling 1,000 years ago, but the gambit between loyalty, betrayal, and redemption has never truly ended in human history. History shattered at the Zhongdu Bridge in 946 AD. Our mission, amidst these chilling mists of time, is to find those scattered, blood-warm fragments of civilization and bring them back, piece by piece.